So Augustine was a pagan who grew up in the 300s AD and lived until 430 AD. And he converted to Christianity and became a bishop, which is pretty cool. And he's one of the most important early thinkers in Christianity. Now, Augustine has been really revolutionary for a lot of reasons, but one of the most important ones has been his impact on education, which is, of course, why we're talking about him. So, Augustine was primarily a teacher. He spent most of his life teaching. But it's interesting because he taught during a time period when books and other written texts weren't widely available. And so a lot of stuff was just spoken word. It was all lecturing and dialogues. And he was actually a huge fan of dialectics. So part of it was because he was shaped by his surroundings, not a lot of access to reading and writing for many of his students, although, of course, he could read and write quite well. So he was really big into dialectics. Something that he was a pioneer of was the idea that lectures aren't really like the main way to teach people, that students are feel more engaged if they can have discussions. And so what he would do is he would have dialogues among students and not just dialogues between students and lecturers. So this is kind of a hallmark of modern education. You can see it all traces back to him. And his focus is really of a revitalization of the classics because this kind of dialectic strategy was important back in the day. And you can read about this in the McCloskey paper that I highlight in my summary. So that was a big thing that he did. Another big thing was that he made a point that all education comes from God. So he wrote constantly about the importance of God in our life in every way. Of course, he was a theologian, but in De Magistro, which is, I guess, it's all about how to be a teacher. It's on being a teacher. He identifies that God is the ultimate teacher, that all knowledge comes from God, and that in our hearts, the true teacher in our heart is Christ. Christ is the ultimate teacher, the ultimate rabbi, and so because of this, there is, there's nothing really all that much more noble than being a teacher and following the model of Christ, but that ultimately it traces back to him. And since Augustine generally argues that the meaning of life itself is God. God is the meaning of life, reaching the love of God, understanding the love of God, and that is evidenced through teaching as well. And so um, the next part that's really important is, and these are strategies that carry over into the modern day completely and clearly, is that he was a pioneer of the idea that your teaching strategy should be adjusted to the learner. So the learner themselves, he kind of identified three groups. So there's the learner that's very educated, and for those people, they should be, the teacher doesn't want to bore them by telling them things they already know. The teacher wants to excite them by allowing them to engage with things that they are not familiar with. And there's a second group of people who are not educated, they don't have an educational background, and it's important for teachers to be patient with them and for teachers to give them a lot of like space and understanding and kind of meet them where they are, not put too much pressure on them. And then the third group, which I think is kind of funny, is he talk about people that think they're well educated but are not well educated, which I think is kind of hilarious. And with those people, it's kind of just teaching becomes a bit of a humbling experience for them if done properly. Now, the last thing that is really important that he kind of draws directly from Jesus on and is able to model for us in his writings, and then of course, it's something we practice to this day. Is he talks about the three rhetorical styles that every lecturer or orator should have. So Jesus is the perfect orator. He's of course God. He's God's voice on earth. He is God on earth, and so all of his strategies and his teaching is what we should model ourselves after. And so the first style that Augustine talks about is docere. So docere is just to teach. It's just the simplest, plainest, just reading of the rules, instructing us. And so we can see that Jesus does this in a bunch of places in the Bible. It's very Ten Commandment like. It's times like the Sermon of the Mount or the Lord's Prayer are times when Jesus uses docere to just lay out the simple basics in clear language that anyone can understand. This is ideal for people that don't have a great understanding or for cases where ambiguity is really important to avoid. Now, the second one is delectare, which is to delight. And so this is basically for people that are getting bored. Teaching, learning can be quite boring sometimes, and so delectare is to delight. You want to pique people's interest, you want to keep them interested, keep them motivated. And so this was an idea that St. Augustine came up with. And again, you can draw it directly from Scripture because if you think about Jesus' parables, many of his teachings come in parables, not because telling those stories was the most logical way of explaining things, but because those are the most interesting ways to explain things. It's very memorable, it's very keeps you interested. Stories like the Good Samaritan, or the parable of the lost sheep, or the prodigal son, or even the sheep and the goats are all great examples of delectare. Interesting stories to keep your interest piqued, but they have that moral, they have that lesson in them. So, and then the third rhetorical style that Saint Augustine talks about is movere. So movere is the grand style, and what this basically does is this is the style that you use when you want to move the hearts and minds of people. And so this is important today for us when we're teaching, and also it was important for Jesus. There were times like when he wept over Jerusalem, or even when he called out when he purified the temple. Times like this where he used the terms that were very dramatic in order to give a message that was very extreme and that people really needed to hear. And as a teacher, this is very important to have all three of these rhetorical styles, just like Jesus. So it's pretty cool. He's a really important figure, and it's interesting to see how he's still influential today with the understanding that love and God are the ultimate goals, and God is the source of everything that we do, and that there's different rhetorical styles that we can use, and of course, that we ultimately are going to have to just adjust the way we teach for each person and try to work in as many discussions and as many interactive elements as possible to be engaging. So, thank you so much. That's my summary of St. Augustine and how he impacted modern teaching.